I was the last caretaker of the church that was buried alive. Part 2. Chapter 11. The Church Moves. I didn't sleep that night. There are certain thresholds in life that, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. You can close your eyes, you can tell yourself it was a dream or a moment of madness, but the air knows. The ground knows. The house knows. And on that night, the house was listening. The hatch at the center of the room had shifted. Just slightly. Enough to wedge the rug upward like a blister forming on skin. It hadn't opened fully, but it had lifted of its own accord, and the space below it breathed. Not literally. Not yet. But the pressure beneath it pulsed gently, as though the earth was considering whether or not to exhale. I spent the hours till morning sitting in a chair near the hearth, black glass lantern at my side, the strange hymnal clutched in my lap. The book had begun to change again, not in shape, but in behavior. Every now and then, it would hum. Not a sound, not even a vibration. Just a presence. Like a sleeping dog twitching in its dreams, or an organ flexing beneath the skin. A living silence. As dawn bled gray across the windows, I decided I had to see the hill again. The walk outside felt different now. The path had lengthened. I know this sounds mad. I had walked it many times. But today, the trees seemed farther apart. The grass more brittle. The ground beneath me held less memory of weight, as if no one had stepped on it for decades. And then I saw it. The hill. It had moved. Not relocated. Not rolled or slid, but rearranged. The slope was steeper now. The iron cross at the summit had tilted forward, like a head bowing in recognition. The stone angels had sunken deeper into the soil, half buried, half emerged, no longer surrounding the mound, but embedded in it, as if being reclaimed. Worse, the grave markers. Where once they stood in a neat, circular pattern around the base of the hill, now they had shifted inward, some drawn nearly halfway up the slope. Drag marks in the soil trailed behind them like snails made of stone. The earth had pulled them closer. The names, those that had once been scratched away, were now restored. Carved deep into the weathered rock, glinting faintly in the light. I walked among them. Most meant nothing to me. But then I saw it. My own name, etched cleanly onto a headstone that hadn't been there yesterday. Fresh, almost pristine, as if carved just hours ago. Caretaker. Born knowing. Died remembered. No dates. No epigraph. Just identity reduced to service. I stepped back. My breath felt too large in my chest. The hill loomed, watching me without eyes. I understood, then, what it was becoming. Not a burial site. A body. The mound wasn't simply a covering for the church below. It was part of it. A skin grown over stone. A host. And it was stirring. I turned to flee, but the village looked different now too. Smaller. Not in size, but in presence. The buildings were faded, like old paintings left too long in the sun. Windows had no glass, just shadows. The well in the center of town had collapsed in on itself, boards splintered outward, as if something had emerged. And I noticed then, in the corner of my eye, a figure standing by the edge of the trees. Tall, unmoving, watching, clad in dark cloth, mouth hidden behind a veil. Not the widow. Too tall, too still. When I blinked, it was gone. But the afterimage remained. I ran back to the cottage, lungs tight, skin cold, hands numb and slick with sweat. The door stuck in its frame, as if it didn't want to open for me. As if it had changed its mind about letting me in. Inside, the black glass lantern had burned down, but the flame hadn't gone out. Instead, it had turned color. No longer violet. Now red. Dark and thick, like a clot, flickering in rhythm with my own heartbeat. On the desk sat the hymnal. It had closed itself. And next to it, a letter. Unsealed. Folded once. Written on the same parchment as the 13th homily. No name. No signature. Just 5 words, inked with finality. The door will not wait. Chapter 12. The names of the stones. I didn't leave the cottage for 2 days. The sun rose and set behind a veil of heavy clouds, casting only a dull glow through the windows. I watched shadows move across the floor, growing longer each hour, even at noon. It was as though the light had forgotten how to behave. The black glass lantern never extinguished. Its flame, now a deep, unnatural red, pulsed with a rhythm that didn't match my heartbeat anymore. I tested it. pressed 2 fingers to my neck and counted. The flame pulsed slower, as if it were syncing with something deeper, something older, something beneath. By the third day, I could no longer resist the pull of the hill. The air outside had changed again. It didn't move around me, it parted, as if I walked inside a bell jar, and the world knew not to disturb me. The grass crunched underfoot like dead paper. Birds no longer flew overhead. Even the crows had vanished. I followed the path to the base of the hill, but something was different. The soil felt uneven. Not just the slope, the texture. I knelt and ran my hand across the dirt, and felt it. Stone, just beneath the surface. Smooth, regular, shaped. Not a foundation. Not ruins. A ceiling. The earth here was thinning. As I looked around, I saw that the hill was no longer a hill at all. Not truly. It had begun to sink inward, subtly. The center of the mound had collapsed slightly, forming a shallow depression, the beginning of a mouth. And all around it, the gravestones had drawn closer. Dozens now. Where before they'd been sparse, now they stood in dense clusters, packed tight like teeth around a throat. Some had been pulled halfway into the soil, tilted as if trying to descend. Others had cracked open, revealing nothing inside but ash. But the worst part? The names. They were no longer just names. Each one had a title now. Miriam Els, third keeper of the key. Jonas Redfield, first choir father. Lemuel Cross, bound witness, reneged. Hannah Ashcroft, mother of the silence. Caretaker, fulfilled. And further along, written in newer script. Caretaker, unfulfilled. It was my name again, carved beside the other. This stone was darker, fresher, free of moss. The chisel marks still raw, like the rock itself had bled to form the letters. There was no date of death, just a line beneath it, shallow and unfinished, as if the carving awaited further instruction. I looked back at the cottage. It seemed farther away than it should have been. I turned again to the circle of stones. A few had been placed at strange angles, not upright, but tilted forward, like they were leaning toward the center of the hill. As if listening. On impulse, I pressed my ear to one. Cold. Silent. Nothing. No, not silence. Breath. Faint and rhythmic. Coming from beneath the stone. Then, ever so softly, I heard a whisper. Not in my ear. In my mind. But shaped by the voice of a woman I did not know. And yet somehow, I did. Do not forget your line. I jerked back. My vision blurred. The gravestones shifted slightly. Not moved. Not visibly. But their arrangement had changed. They were no longer a circle. They were a choir stall. A semicircle around the center of the hill, facing inward, as if waiting for the conductor to raise his hand. As if waiting for me. When I returned to the cottage, the fire had gone out, though I hadn't lit one in days. Ash covered the hearth. A faint wind blew from the closed flue, carrying with it the scent of old wax and paper. On the desk sat the hymnal again. Open. Not to a verse. To a list. A roll call. Dozens of names, some familiar, most not. And beside each, a date of entry and of fate. Jonas Redfield, entered 1892, assimilated. Hannah Ashcroft, entered 1919, preserved. Ellery Finch, entered 1936, rejected. Entered pending, status, incomplete. The ink beneath my name was still wet. And below that, one more line had been added, barely legible, scrawled in a frantic, unfamiliar hand. The stones know the order. But the flesh must still agree. That night, I dreamed again. Only this time, I was not among the choir. I was leading it. Chapter 13, the choir rises. I awoke to movement. Not sound. Not light. Movement. Like a breath drawn too slowly behind the walls of the house. A sense that the structure around me had inhaled during the night and wasn't sure if it wanted to exhale. The hearth was cold again. The lantern's flame had narrowed to a thin red thread, barely clinging to the wick, yet it pulsed in rhythm with something outside. Something near. I didn't open the curtains. Some part of me already knew what stood beyond them. I found myself at the desk again. The hymnal was open. But now, the pages were blank. Not empty, blank like waiting parchment. The fibers quivered faintly in the candlelight, as if braced for something to be written or revealed. I flipped back to the roll call. The ink beside my name was no longer wet. It had spread, bled into the parchment like veins. The word incomplete had twisted into something else. Begun. Just before dusk, I heard the first voice. It came from the trees behind the cottage. Faint, wavering, not quite singing, not quite moaning. It sounded like a person trying to hum a melody they could no longer remember, their mouth half sewn, breath catching on every note. I opened the door. Slowly, carefully. The trees were still, but between them stood figures. Not many. Not yet. 4 or 5. Thin silhouettes wrapped in heavy, wet cloth that clung to their limbs like burial shrouds. No faces. No voices. Just that humming, low and discordant, like it was being sung through water and thread. They didn't move toward me. They simply stood, waiting. I closed the door, barred it, lit what few candles I had left, including the strange ones the widow Ashcroft had left. Their wicks burned black. I retreated into the study and turned again to the instruction book, the first one, bound in cracked leather. Pages I hadn't noticed before now curled upward of their own accord. There, written in brittle ink, when the second bell is rung, the choir stirs in remembrance. They will not knock. They are not the knocking. They do not speak. They are not the voice. They are the echo. They are the song. Then, beneath it, when the choir rises, the stone begins to dream. I looked up. The hatch in the floor had begun to tremble. Just slightly, a soft vibration, like a distant drumbeat, echoing through wood and bone. Not constant. Rhythmic. I looked at the walls. The shadows had begun to ripple, not from candlelight, but in defiance of it. They moved even when the flames were still. The silhouette of my own body cast backward and then forward again, bending and collapsing like a puppet mid-performance. Then the first true sound. The bell. But not from the tower. From beneath. Muffled. Deeper. Wrong. As though rung by something that did not understand how bells work. Only that they are to be used. That they mean something. The knock came next. Not on the door. On the window. 3 fingers. Wet. Spaced too wide apart. They traced a line down the glass. Not to see in, but to remind me I had been seen. Outside, the choir had gathered. Dozens now. Wrapped in robes made of stitched parchment and dried skin, ink seeping from their hems like blood from an old wound. Their feet didn't touch the ground. They stood as though suspended just inches above it, toes twitching faintly, trying to remember what it meant to walk. And all of them were humming. The same backward hymn I had dreamed. They weren't looking at the house. They were facing the hill, their heads tilted upward in perfect, unnatural unison. I opened the hymnal again. A new line had appeared at the top of the page, written not in ink, but in something darker, crusted, flaking, something that smelled of rust and old meat. The choir remembers what the bell forgets. I turned the page. My name was written there, no longer a line in a list. It had become the title of a verse, and beneath it, a series of words arranged like lyrics. My thoughts, my memories, my dreams, all rewritten as music. I hadn't composed it, but it was mine. I was being sung into the world, not by choice, but by inheritance. Then, one final thing. As night fell, and the shadows grew bold enough to slip along the floor like snakes, I stepped once more to the window. I had to know. I had to see. Among the pale, swaying bodies of the choir, one figure did not hum. One stood taller, still, cloaked in darker cloth, face veiled, arms outstretched like a conductor waiting to begin. It was watching me. I blinked, and it lifted one arm, pointing not at the hill, but at me. Chapter 14, the old name. I hadn't spoken in 2 days. I hadn't needed to. Every sound that might have emerged from my throat had already been anticipated, echoed back to me through walls that now pulsed faintly with warmth. Like the wood was breathing, like the house had developed lungs. I read in silence. I walked in silence. I dreamed in choral whispers and awoke with songs still wet on my tongue. But I did not speak. Not until I said the name. The day began without light. Though the clock ticked past dawn, no sun broke the gray mass hanging over the village. The sky was not merely overcast, it was closed, as if heaven itself had been shuttered. I made tea I didn't drink. Paced rooms that had shifted in layout, subtly, but certainly. A window that once faced the west now opened toward the trees. The staircase creaked in a pattern that repeated, like a voice struggling to form a word. And the hatch in the floor? It was open. Not wide. Just a crack. But from that crack rose the scent of ink and stone and dried blood, along with something stranger, the perfume of my childhood church, the one my mother had taken me to before she died. Incense, beeswax, wet stone warmed by breath and decades of prayer. Only, it didn't comfort me. It made me ache. Because I understood what it meant. It remembers me better than I remember myself. The hymnal had changed again. It no longer contained verses. It now contained instructions. Not written, but suggested. When I opened it, the pages turned to a blank spread that darkened around the edges, ink seeping inward like mold, slowly forming a hole in the page. And as I stared into it, I began to hear the name. Not in my ears, not in the room, in my mouth. Already forming, already on its way. The problem was, I already knew the rules. Speak not the church's name. It is neither holy nor forgotten. The name is not a word. It is an invitation. And once spoken, it begins to speak back. And still, I said it. It wasn't willful. Not exactly. It came out in pieces, in fragments, like coughing up dust from a house that hadn't been lived in for 100 years. But somehow my throat shaped it. The syllables were wrong. Too many for the human mouth, some of them vowel shapes that vibrated behind my teeth, as though I were trying to pronounce breath itself. Ethranol, solemn, vesket, orin. Each syllable felt like a nail driven into the soil. When I finished, the air didn't react. It corrected. There was no thunder, no tremor, just silence, pure, absolute silence. Like the air had sealed itself shut around me, pressing down against my eardrums with the cold weight of disapproval. And then something deep below began to move. Not shake, not shift, move. Like the sound of flesh changing shape inside stone. The boards of the cottage floor rippled beneath me, not as an illusion, but like pressure moving through bone. The walls buckled inward and then relaxed, as if the house were being exhaled through a throat far beneath it. I ran to the window, pulled the curtain aside. The hill was bleeding. Not rapidly, not violently, but from the crown of the mound, where the iron cross once stood, thin black rivulets now seeped from the earth like oil, trickling down in paths too straight to be natural. The soil didn't absorb it. It fed on it. And from the edges of the forest, the choir gathered again. Only now, they had changed. Their robes had grown tight, clinging to their forms like wet skin. Their mouths, once sewn shut, now gaped open, stitched lips torn and hanging. Their teeth were long, sharpened, not monstrous, but ritualized, as though filed for some old purpose. And their song? They no longer hummed. They spoke. Not words, not in any recognizable language. They spoke tones, vibrations, guttural syllables that twisted the air around them into a spiral of pressure. The leader, the veiled figure I had seen before, raised both arms. And they repeated the name I had spoken, perfectly, like a congregation affirming its preacher. Ethranol, solemn, vesket, orin. Only now it wasn't just a name. It was a door. I fell to my knees, choking on breath I hadn't realized I'd lost. My chest heaved, vision spinning, ears filled with a low, constant ringing. Not like a bell, like feedback, like reality had heard what I said and was trying to process it. Then I heard it, a voice, from under the house. It didn't shout. It whispered, "You are the mouth now." And with that, the hatch swung wide. Stairs led down into the dark. But now, they were not carved stone. They were bone white. And they waited. Chapter 15, The Church Breaks the Earth. The moment the hatch opened fully, I felt the gravity shift. Not down, inward. Like the house, the hill, and everything around me were no longer fixed to a surface, but tethered by invisible threads pulling toward a point beneath all things. As if the earth was not a resting place, but a mouth with its lips just parting. The stairs beneath the hatch were bone white. Not in color only, in texture. Calcified. Smooth. Irregular. Vertebrae, perhaps. Or ribs. They creaked faintly beneath my boots as I descended, but they did not break. Each step downward was accompanied by a breath that was not mine. A slow, warm draft rising up the tunnel. The air smelled of parchment, candle wax, and old marrow. The church was waking. The space below the cottage had grown. I had been here before, early on, when the hatch first revealed itself. But now, the chamber had deepened, its ceiling expanded, The walls no longer stone, but something more porous, alive. I looked up and saw that the roots hanging from above had changed. Not roots. Fingers. Thin and brittle, like mummified hands, knuckled and curled. Some had nails. Others were bound in waxy cords. They moved faintly when I passed beneath them, like dead vines stirred by an unseen breeze. At the far end of the chamber, the great stone door still stood, but it was no longer sealed. It had cracked open, not swung or split, but peeled, like scabbed flesh drawn back from a wound. From within came light, a dim, flickering illumination the color of deep, clotted blood, not cast by flame, but by the memory of fire that once burned in worship. I stepped inside. The room beyond the door was not vast, but it felt endless. A long hall of pews carved from bone, all facing a pulpit made of broken slate and twisted iron. The ceiling was impossibly high, but I could see no rafters, no chandeliers, only ropes. Hundreds of them, dangling from the void above, frayed and swaying slightly, though there was no wind. Some ropes ended in loops, others in tongues, carved from wood, wrapped in twine, hung upside down as if drying for use. The floor beneath the pulpit was not stone. It was glass. Beneath it, I saw faces, pale, expressionless, staring upward. They weren't moving, but they weren't still either. Then the bell rang again. But this time it didn't sound above or below. It sounded through me. A low, vibrating gong that rattled in my chest and echoed behind my eyes. My teeth ached. My nails burned. My skin pulsed like parchment stretched over boiling ink. And somewhere in the dark above the ropes, something shifted. The church had begun to move. Outside, I would later learn, the sky turned the color of old bruises. The ground did not shake. It breathed. The village well, long boarded up, long sealed, exploded outward. Board shattered. Stone cracked. A thick, black root burst from its center, spiraling upward like a spine, twisting toward the sky. The hill caved inward, not as a collapse, but as a birth canal opening. And from the base of the mound, just beneath the iron cross that no longer stood, a spire emerged. Not new. Old. Ancient. Fossilized. Carved with language that writhed when watched. Its surface etched with mouths, some open in song, others sealed by hands of stone. The choir, gathered at the forest's edge, began to march forward. Their song shifted from harmony to invocation. They were no longer praising. They were welcoming. Inside the church, I could feel the movement. Not rising, but unfolding. The space around me extended outward like wings unfurling, not by opening doors or shifting walls, but by consuming the world beyond. The church wasn't ascending from the ground. The world above was being absorbed into it. And I was at its center. Not by choice, by designation. The pulpit cracked, split open. A book rose from within, not placed, not delivered. Grown. Its spine writhed. Its pages fluttered like a heartbeat. The cover was stitched flesh, the title burned in gold. Caretaker, speak the fulfillment. I stepped forward. The faces beneath the glass moved in unison, mouths open, breathless, watching me with blank reverence. I opened the book. No pages. Only a mirror. It reflected not my face, but my own eyes, embedded in a figure of wax and ash. A version of me stitched from the sermons, the dreams, the soil. It smiled. Not kindly. A voice echoed above, far from the ropes, deeper than the pulpit. The bell has spoken. The bones have listened. Now sing your name and be consumed. I didn't run. There was nowhere to run. The church was no longer beneath the earth. It was the earth. It had broken through the skin of the world. It had remembered itself, and it had made me its mouth. Chapter 16, the Mass begins. There was no call to worship. There was no invitation. There was only participation. The moment the book opened to reveal the mirror, something changed, not just in the buried church, but in the village above. The difference wasn't sudden. It wasn't loud. It was total. It began with the bells. Not one, not two, but 7. Each rung from a different place in the world above, some from the trees, others from deep beneath the soil. None were mounted, none struck by visible hand, and yet each one rang in perfect, dreadful sequence. And with each toll, a window opened. Not physical windows. Not glass. But thresholds, unseen until that moment, in the sky, in the air, in the minds of those who had remained behind. In the houses of the village, old men stood from their chairs. Women who had been bedridden for years rose and dressed in garments they hadn't worn in half a century. Children, long silent, began to hum under their breath, melodies they'd never been taught. All of them knew where to go. They walked in single file, not toward the church above, for there was no longer such a place, but toward the hill that was no longer a hill. It had collapsed inward entirely, forming a crater of flesh-colored stone, at the center of which the spire rose. Not a steeple, a tooth, a monolith of memory carved from the world's first altar. And they entered, one by one, without fear. From within the chapel below, I heard their arrival before I saw it. The sound wasn't footsteps or voices. It was breathing, a single inhalation, drawn not by lungs, but by the church itself. The building expanded as they approached. Pews lengthened, aisles stretched, and the choir stalls pulsed like hearts. Then the congregation arrived. They did not look like themselves. Not entirely. Their eyes were coated in a thin layer of wax, like ritual blindfolds. Their clothing had changed, worn vestments of black linen and parchment, covered in symbols that pulsed when looked at directly. They did not speak. They did not pray. They knelt, and they listened. I stood at the pulpit, still holding the mirror book, still watching myself, or what I had become, reflected in the shape of the caretaker fulfilled. Then the ropes above began to twitch. One by one, they descended. Not straight, not uniform. They reached, curving like fingers, lowering objects wrapped in linen and sinew. Each bundle twitched faintly, as if the weight inside still remembered movement. The ropes sang, not with voice, but with tension, vibrations echoing through the chamber like harp strings plucked by unseen hands. The choir re-entered, no longer cloaked figures at the forest's edge, but now unveiled, their mouths stretched wide in permanent inversion, lips torn and re-threaded to form sacred sigils. Some had no faces left at all, only masks carved from stone and worn so long the bone beneath had forgotten how to breathe. They stood behind the congregation, and the mass began. I don't remember speaking, but I remember hearing my voice. And so we gather not to rise, but to descend into memory, to become the echo that carves the shape of the divine. I spoke with two voices, mine and another, older, wiser, rotting. It spoke through me like smoke through a veil. My tongue moved, but the words were older than any tongue should remember. The congregation wept, not in sorrow, in recognition, because this wasn't new. This wasn't invention. This was ritual resuming after an interruption of decades, maybe centuries. They remembered this mass. Their bones remembered it. And so they repeated the verses. The flesh is temporary. The bell is eternal. We are not forgiven. We are remembered. The floor beneath the altar cracked. Glass shattered. The faces within it, the ones I had seen frozen in silence, opened their mouths together, and from them came the true hymn. A noise so low, so layered, it sounded like the turning of ancient gears inside the world itself. Unseal the sermon. Uncoil the tongue. Open the second book. I looked down. The book I held, the one that had shown me the mirror, was no longer bound shut. Its cover had split like skin, revealing a second layer, thicker, paler, stitched with human hair. And written on this inner cover was a sentence. This time, there will be no amen. The pulpit opened again. Not up, down. A shaft revealed itself beneath my feet, descending deeper into the earth, lined with spiraled scripture etched in blood and shadow. A voice whispered from below. The sermon continues in stone. The congregation did not stir. They waited. Their ears turned slightly, not toward the pulpit, not toward me, but toward the hole, toward where the rest of the mass would take place. Above us, the world had grown still. The wind had stopped. The clouds had petrified. The sky had no color, only the shade of a page before it is written on. The church no longer existed within the village. The village now existed within the church. And I, no longer a man, was its voice. Chapter 17, The Hollow Covenant. The descent was not made with feet. The shaft beneath the pulpit did not lead down, not in the way a tunnel leads to a cellar or crypt. It pulled, as though the floor beneath the church had folded inward like paper soaked in black water, and I had slipped through the crease into a space older than direction. There were stairs, but they were not for walking. They were for confession. Each step pulsed as I passed it, as if absorbing my weight, or perhaps my memory, imprinting something of me into its shape. I could no longer tell if I was descending or being carved. The air down here was not air at all. It was intent. Every breath filled me not with oxygen, but with understanding. And the deeper I went, the more I began to hear the words that had always been behind the words. The church was not built to save. The church was not built to serve. The church was built to seal. At the end of the descent, I entered a chamber that was no chamber. It was a wound in the world. A circular space hewn from living stone, domed above with calcified roots and veins that pulsed faintly. In the center, a basin. Shallow, cracked, filled not with water, but with ink the color of teeth. Surrounding the basin were 7 empty thrones, each carved from different material: bone, iron, ashwood, wax, saltstone, obsidian, and flesh. Preserved, still warm. Each one bore an emblem. Each one had once held a binder. I approached the wall behind the 7th throne. Upon it was a relief, a carving of the first covenant. Not the ones I had been taught. Not tablets. Not law. But a map. A map of the world as it once was, veined with spires and caverns, altars and mouths, all connected by an arterial network of churches, each built not to preach, but to anchor. And at the center of the map, unmarked, unspoken, unbuilt, was this place. The root mouth. The first breach. The place where the divine attempted to speak, and what came out instead was the voice that devours. On the wall, beneath the map, was an inscription, written in the old tongue. I didn't read it. I remembered it, as if I had stood here before, lifetimes ago, and chiseled it myself, as if it had been hidden in the marrow of my bones, waiting to be reawakened. This place is not forgotten. This place is not forgiven. This is where God turned away. I fell to my knees, not from pain, not from reverence, but because I understood. All this time, I believed I had been chosen to protect the church, to care for it, to be its voice, its memory, its last steward. But I had not been chosen to preserve. I had been chosen to distract, to sing loud enough so the rest of the world wouldn't hear the true voice stirring beneath the stone. You are not the caretaker, the voice said. You are the final seal. And now I had broken myself open. The 7 thrones were no longer empty. Shadows had begun to form in them. Not people, not saints. Echoes, each one bearing the face of someone I had seen in dreams. Some had names from the roll call. Others bore my face. They opened their mouths, and in unison, spoke the words of the hollow covenant. Let the stone remember. Let the bell forget. Let the sermon continue without God. The basin of ink boiled. The glass beneath the pulpit cracked again. And far above, in the broken sky, the villagers still kneeling in the sanctuary began to smile. Because they too had remembered. This was not a place of exile. It was a prison, and the warden was gone. The story may end here, but the darkness never sleeps. Like this video to keep the shadows stirring. Share your whispers in the comments. Your voice shapes the next nightmare. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Gothic Hour Stories and Mysteries, where every tale lingers and every soul leaves a mark. The Gothic Hour awaits.